Conversations across time. 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 Across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across.
The show you're about to see this evening has three important historical characters from different periods. Queen Esther of Persia from the 5th century BCE, Spartacus, the Roman radical who rebelled against the Roman Empire from the 1st century BCE, and Lyndon Baines Johnson, the 36th President of the United States. Now, while these people seem very diverse, the thing they have in common is they all fought for the oppressed. Sit back and watch this stimulating show.
Welcome once again to Conversations Across Time, the TV show that allows you, the viewer, to observe imaginary conversations that may have happened between interesting historical personalities. And tonight we have as our guest, first of all, my co-host and dear friend, former Pennsylvania State Representative, Babette Joseph. Welcome, Babette.
I love being here. Thank you.
We're so glad to have you here. I'm happy that we're able to do this. And seated next to Babette is Spartacus. Welcome.
Thank you. I feel welcome.
Seated next to Spartacus is Queen Esther.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And of course, seated next to Queen Esther is President Lyndon Baines Johnson. Thank you so much, President Johnson.
My pleasure, ma'am.
Now, what we want to do tonight is, we want to talk about oppression. And we want to talk about oppressed populations getting some parity within the political arena. I want to start with you, Queen Esther. I want to ask a question of you.
Absolutely.
First of all, you lived in Persia during the 5th century BCE, before the Common Era.
That's correct.
And you are a Jew.
Yes, I am.
Jews were second-class citizens during that time.
That is correct.
So, would you give us some background as to how you came to be queen? I know that we know that King Xerxes dethroned his wife Vashti for insubordination, and as a second-class citizen, you were one of. First of all, you were actually hiding. I don't think people knew that you were Jewish. In fact, your name was Hadassah.
It was. That is correct.
Before it was changed to Esther. We do know that your godfather, your uncle, who had raised you and was in a sense your godfather, Mordecai, was someone who had been very successful because he spoke many languages. He was a trader, T-R-A-D-E-R.
Thank you.
Trader.
Thank you.
And so he lived by his wits. And so your uncle Mordecai actually was able to provide you with a lot of information. And when King Xerxes dethroned Queen Vashti, he actually sent out and got all of the beautiful virgins in the empire, in the Persian Empire. And these young girls were in a training camp, so to speak. So you were one of many young women who were in training camps, and King Xerxes was to make a decision as to who he would select as queen. So what I'd like you to do is give us some background about Queen Vashti, because I think there is a lot that we don't understand about that whole transition.
That is correct. Queen Vashti, it's interesting because many stories have been told about her. And it's my understanding through the court walls that she was to come down during a huge gathering of over 127 provinces of Persia, and she was supposed to display herself in the complete nude. Now,
wait a minute. Let me get this
They
straight.
never
Yes.
taught us that in religious school.
yes, and
So her husband ordered her to come down.
that is correct.
Now, you said that how many people were present, and what was their gender?
Yes, most of them were males, and they were soldiers. And again, it was over 127 provinces of Persia. So can you just imagine all the people that would have been there, and just imagine her herself coming down, obeying the king's wishes, and displaying herself in that kind of state. How mortifying that must have
One
been.
wonders what would have happened after her dance was over as well. I mean, I wonder about that. The room was all full of drunken men
That is correct.
And she was to come down and entertain them.
Absolutely.
in the nude.
Yes, and it is said to believe that the king, my husband, had a lot to drink, and it was an occasion that lasted over 180 days in Susa. So it went on and on and on. He might not have been altogether there at the moment that he requested such a wish, but she denied, and she did not accept, and she actually risked being beheaded. And instead of being beheaded, she was told to leave.
She was banished, I guess.
She was banished.
See, we
That is
never
correct.
learned that. In religious school, we were told she was asked to dance, and she wouldn't do it. And then he divorced her and banished her, and it never made a lot of sense to me. Why wouldn't she dance? Nobody told us it was naked.
And I think
that
what's
is correct.
interesting about that, when you talk about in religious school, of course, and Babette, you know, your background being Jewish, so you're talking about in Hebrew school.
Well,
This is-
yeah,
and
religious
this-
school.
But my point is, in the Bible, the King James version of the Bible, which is just a version of the Bible, and I always say when anybody tells me what's in the Bible, I have questions about it, because which Bible are you talking about?
Yes.
And it's been translated so many times and edited. But even in the King James version of the Bible that survives to this day, that many Christians use, it reads as though Queen Vashti was this evil person who just couldn't be bothered.
That's what we learned, that
Yeah.
she was an evil person. But the more I know about the story, the more I think she was one of the first feminists.
Exactly.
And it's interesting also, if I may also add, the fact that after she had been banished, the king passed, I believe it was a law at the time, that all males of the household would oversee all of the wife's wishes. So anything as far as feminism goes, he wanted to put a stop to. He wanted to make sure that it was known that if the husband of the household wanted to do whatever he wished, he could. And if the wife opposed, she had to listen.
Well, I want to say something that
It's
survives
not so
today.
different nowadays.
That's right. That survives today in the, as I said, the King James version of the Bible that so many Christians want to use, because it says, I believe, let me think of which book it's in, maybe in the book of Timothy, when the Apostle Paul is writing to Timothy, and Timothy is like an emissary for the church, and he says to Timothy that he must alert the church that women are to be subjected to their husbands, and slaves are to be subjected to their masters, which of course is something that Spartacus, you as a former slave, who was at one point, you were military trained by the Romans, and
I was a gladiator.
I know you. But I mean, you were made a slave because you deserted the Roman army for some reason, and then were captured and made a slave. And then, because you were so strong, they sent you to gladiator school. I'm just thinking, because you led an uprising of slaves, how do you feel about what you're hearing that Queen Vashti, we haven't even, and Queen Esther, we do thank you for being forthcoming about your predecessor.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
But in terms of slavery and you leading a revolt of slaves. Do you have any idea or any feeling about what you just heard that happened to Queen Vashti?
Do I have feelings about
Not
a queen?
feelings. I know you're a gladiator, please. You're a warrior. But do you have any thoughts?
I think that was a difficult decision.
Whose decision? The king's?
Kings don't have
Vashti's?
any difficult decisions until someone is trying
Right.
to kill them.
Right.
This is a difficult decision because there was no escape at that point for her. There's never escape for women in an empire.
Well, like that, no. And there's very little escape nowadays as well. You have
This is a complex society, but it's still an empire.
yes, in its own way.
You know, and
Wearing ugly clothes.
And you still have the right-wing commentators sort of saying that being raped on campus is sort of a
rite of passage.
syndrome of the privileged or something. It's hard to figure out what they think they're talking about.
Well, it's always been difficult to believe rich people talking about poor people. They don't tell a lot of truth.
Well, but of course you were a free man talking about
I was
slaves.
never a rich man.
Well,
but you were free. See, I think that's one of the reasons that makes your story so interesting to us, because you were free, and at some point you became a slave for what may have been something that today would not seem major, but you were, for whatever reason, and we never find out why you were AWOL for a period of time, but the Roman army was such that you had to be punished. You had to be made an example of, which is why you were enslaved and then put in gladiator school. Now, the slave revolt that you led, it's important for the audience to understand that during the time that you were enslaved, 1 in 3 persons in the Roman Empire were slaves.
which is an amazing figure. It's an amazing figure.
1/3 of the population were slaves.
How could you keep them under control?
With the other 2/3.
With the other,
Yeah,
well, I mean, we'll get to that a little later on because that's exactly what happened, and that's why President Johnson. I think when one looks at the many things that you were able to accomplish, first of all, you were unique as an individual because you were a congressman, you were a senator, you were vice president, and later you were president.
Yes, that is true, ma'am. I knew what you call the players were. I know who did what in the House and in the Senate.
And you did things for them, so they were grateful to you and friendly to you.
Yes, ma'am. And I'm afraid that's how things operate in Washington.
That's the way they operate in life. There's nothing wrong with that.
And there's nothing wrong with that, and I think that it is important because we frequently have guests that are strategists, and Babette and I have had conversations with Machiavelli and with Sun Tzu, and we are always impressed by the strategies that they use. And you are most impressive because when we come back after a break, I will go through some of the legislation, some of the acts that you were able to get through Congress. So you're a most impressive president. I think you are just not given the credit that you deserve. But we'll be back after break and we'll discuss some of your accomplishments.
of the characters on the show are playing historical figures, people that you probably heard of or maybe just vaguely kind of knew existed and did something important. Unlike them, I play myself. And my role is to provoke the historical figures, to stimulate the conversation, to keep it going, to make sure it's not polite, to make sure it's provocative, to make sure I try and ask questions that get the other characters confused, angry, upset, even combative.
President Johnson, I wanted to talk about some of your accomplishments, but I have to put it in context. You got a great many programs through Congress that are still with us today, part of a social network that a lot of people have come to depend on.
Cut to shreds, though.
Exactly, and they're trying to cut to shreds. And one of the things that we hear from the right is that they want to make certain that they decrease the deficit. Now, what's interesting is that during all of the great things that you did, you increased the national deficit by 4%. Ronald Wilson Reagan increased the deficit by 187%. In contrast, President Obama has increased the deficit by 47%. And yet, we hear the right interested in shredding away some of the programs that you put into place. Let's talk about what you did. The Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, Medicare, Community Development Block Grants, Head Start, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Child Safety Act, the Food Stamp Program. All of this was part of what you called your great society. And you made that speech in May 22nd, 1964 at the University of Michigan. All of these things that you were able to incorporate into the fabric of what is the United States at only a 4% increase in the deficit. So that brings to mind the question that we alluded to earlier. You got all of these things done because you were able to twist people's arms. You knew where the bones were buried. But
yes.
Talk a little bit about what led you to do that, because obviously at the time that you did these things, there was a great disparity between the have and the have-nots, which is sort of bad. I guess it's where we are today.
Oh, getting worse every minute.
Yes, madam, that is correct. I had used every maneuver in Congress I had available to me. I used all kinds of cajolery and threats if need be on the various members of Congress, the Senate and the House, so as to get that legislation across. And I was able to do that because I've known them personally. I've worked with them personally. I had even been able to work with President Eisenhower of the opposing party to get some legislation accomplished. And I was able to work across the aisle, work with the Republicans, and I must say the Republican Party of today bears no resemblance to President Eisenhower's Republican Party. I was
That's
able.
for sure.
Would he even, I think today, if he were alive today, he wouldn't even be considered a Republican.
He might not want to be a Republican. I know many people who have left the Republican Party, and they weren't, nearly as left-wing as
Yes.
you or Eisenhower.
That is true, madam. I have been noticing lately the prevalence of the John Birch Society, which was founded in, as I recall, 1958. And one of their beliefs was that even such a man as General Eisenhower, who served his country for over 30 years, they claim that such a man was a dedicated communist agent, which shows the depth of.
Well, wait a minute. We're talking about
depravity and illusions, craziness.
it's craziness because we're talking about President Eisenhower. Before he was president, was General Eisenhower, and he was the supreme commander of the Allied forces during the Second World War. Now,
They call everybody a communist. It doesn't really mean too much from them anymore.
but the presence of the John Birch Society and the fact that the John Birch Society today is rearing its head, and in fact it seems to be a large part of, we have something called a Tea Party. I don't know if you're familiar with the Tea Party.
I am familiar with it, madam, and I recognize their rhetoric, and it bears great resemblance to the rhetoric of the John Birch Society. Very similar, madam.
It's true.
And so I think when we have these kinds of conversations, and this is a conversation about oppression, and certainly you, Queen Esther, you have some understanding of oppression. And I think why we celebrate you so much is because you were able to get some rights for the Jews during the Persian Empire.
What happened was this evil person named Haman, right?
That is
Yes.
correct.
Got your husband to do something he shouldn't have done, and you jumped into the rescue. And what did you do, and how did you do it? And my real question is, what would you have done if the king had asked you to dance naked? But tell us,
Oh dear,
tell us how you saved the suppressed, your people, the Jews from the Persians.
Well, I guess I should begin to say that through faith has guided me much of my path. And so when I got wind of what Haman had set forth to do to the Jewish people, and the fact that the king, my husband, did not know at that time that I was Jewish, I did have to be extremely careful how I went about such a situation. Mordecai, who was my guardian, came to me and expressed his great concerns that the whole Jewish population was due to be completely annihilated. So
And
Sounds familiar?
it does.
it does, doesn't it?
And let's talk about Mordecai. How did he find this information? I mean, I know that he was someone that was influential, and he was a tradesman, and but I think he uncovered a plot. Is that what happened?
There was a plot, yes. Prior to, he overheard two of the kingsman's court plan a plot to kill the king himself. And he told me, and when I caught wind of the news, I immediately told my husband, the king, and he gave Mordecai recognition for that.
Okay.
Yes, he did. And so he became in favor of the king on part of the court.
And so did you.
That is correct, yes.
However, when you took the chance in even speaking to your husband, because I don't think a lot of people, I know our audience will not understand that Xerxes was a particular kind of ruler who did not allow people to approach him. You had to wait to be summoned to the king.
That is correct, and I wasn't exactly summoned. So what happened was I took 3 days of complete fasting, complete prayer, and deep thought as to how I would approach the king. And he had heard that I had been fasting. And I was walking back and forth where he was standing, and he saw me, and he allowed me to come forth to him. And I actually invited him to a party that I created, yes. And I invited him and everybody to attend, and it went very well the first night. The second night came about, and he came to me, and he said, "I will grant you anything you wish." And it was then that I set forth and I told the king of how the Jewish population would be annihilated, and my sincerest gratitude towards the people because I was Jewish, and I am Jewish.
That was when he found out you were Jewish.
Yes, that is correct. And I did take great risk with that because I could have very well been beheaded. I could have been banished. right there, I could have lost my life. But through my passion for the people and my patience with prayer led me to that.
And because you helped him, I mean, you exposed the plot.
That is correct, and
It certainly didn't do you any harm with him.
It's quite a miracle to expose a plot and not die.
Yes.
Thank you.
I commend you, madam, for your courage.
Thank you.
And that of your predecessor, Queen Vashti,
Yes.
for standing up for her dignity. Your husband, I'm afraid, was no gentleman.
It's true.
I shall keep silent with that,
That's
but yes.
condemnation.
And I think Spartacus makes an interesting observation.
Yes.
To uncover a plot is always
Very
Dangerous.
dangerous.
Very
Very
dangerous.
dangerous. But they survived it. Mordecai was smart. She was smart.
And what was so interesting prior to that is that Haman had planned to kill Mordecai, and to some degree, and it kind of reversed the roles. So when the king had left after I exposed myself being Jewish, he wasn't exactly thrilled. And Haman came and he actually got down on his hands and his feet and begged for forgiveness. When my king came back, he saw that he was at my feet, and he thought that Haman was making, I guess you could say, a pass at me, so to speak. And so with that happening, he did, yes he did. And he was hung, and he was hung, along with all of his 10 sons.
One of the things that was interesting about that is that Mordecai led to the king finding out about this plot against his life. Because there were two different plots, one against the Jewish people and another one against the king's life.
Yes.
And Mordecai got
Knew
that
about
information.
both of them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he knew about both of them. He got that information to you, and you were able, through the use of a eunuch that
Yes.
was assigned to you, to get that information to Mordecai about
That
the
is
threat
correct.
on his life.
Yes.
Now, what's humorous to me is that Haman, who was an evil man, was in fact with the king, and the king asked him, what should he do to honor
Yes.
such a man?
Oh, this is great.
And Haman thought he was talking about him. You want to explain?
Oh,
that a little
yes, thank you. It's funny how roles can be reversed so easily. So the king came to Haman and asked, how he would go about treating, such a person. And
bit?
Haman,
A person who had saved his life.
yes, and Haman thought that he was talking about him, and spoke of all this gloriousness and how he would, gain certain titles
And honor such a man?
and honor such a man. And what indeed happened is the king thanked him, and in return, Mordecai received exactly what he wished.
After what Haman wanted for himself, and what he
Exactly.
outlined to the king for this perfect man, actually was what ended up being given to Mordecai.
Correct.
Is that correct?
And
That is
Haman
correct.
ended up on the gallows.
Yes, he did.
I mean, Mordecai, of course, is an interesting person, but it is very unlikely that such a man would have escaped the detection of someone like a Haman. And I guess that's what led Haman to come up with this plot to annihilate all the Jews. He was so incensed against Mordecai.
And it's interesting, too, because history does like to repeat itself. But I will save that part for a bit
And
later,
we will talk
possibly.
about that. I believe at this moment, this is a good place for us to leave this conversation.
I agree.
We will take it up again, and I hope that you can come back and we can continue this interesting conversation about Mordecai. We all know that Haman ends up dying on the gallows that he had built to execute Mordecai on.
That is correct.
Yes. So, once again, we come to an end of this segment, and we do ask that you come back next week and join us for Conversations Across Time, and we will invite these wonderful guests back and have more conversation across time. Thank you.